I suppose the debate that interests me is, especially in Australia, is the balance of making best use of what we got versus let's build something new. And I
Yep.
still feel that there's an emphasis more on let's build rather than let's maximize.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that 100%. I mean, in the 80s, I was in heavy construction at the time, putting the sewers and everything in. And, yeah, and I asked my people I worked with 30 years on, you know, why are you still spending so much on capital? When we did all that building in the mid 80s, especially when the interest rates were high, but we had all those issues and we put new things in the ground and you're still spending on capital. Taking out of the fact that we're improving the service we're delivering and taking out the factor that we're adding more assets because of growth or whatever the reason be, but we're still spending a heck of a lot on capital. And you got to ask the question, why? What's the benefit?
And I think the other challenge is, given the current renewal rates, what are the lives of the assets that we're expecting?
Yeah.
Was in a recent conversation where assets were expected to last 500 years.
Yeah.
No, those assets will not last 500. And there are instances in Australia where people are estimating lives of 10,000 years. Okay. Now,
we won't be around 10,000 years.
So, interestingly enough, I've just bought a holiday house and I've been listening to the History of Rome podcast. And if you use the precedent set by the Romans, which were very good engineers, and you look at how many of their assets are actually still around, and we're only talking 2,000 years ago, and it puts into perspective of if we are actually even expecting our assets to last thousands of years, the Romans have proven that that's not the case, and of course we have many more assets these days than what they had.
Yeah, that was just fantastic at what they do.
Oh.
I also have that appreciation. You look back in time and you see what they produced at that time with the tools they had, and it's just marvelous. And some of the stuff still works.
Yes.
And here we struggle. A building has a life of 20 years, and they were tearing down to build the big, what I'll call the army barracks opposite Flinders Street Station. They took the gas and fuel buildings down, and they were only about 20, 30 years old at the most, and they were being torn down. Yeah, we don't give it a very good life. We really. There's other drivers that will influence it, but it doesn't matter. They're still turning them over, and we're still estimating long lives.
Yes.
And you've got to bring in all those social factors, political factors, and everything else. Yeah, what is the life of these things? What's the intended life? The civilization, as we know it today, won't be around in 2,000 years in the form that we have now, for whatever reason. Africa's developing at a huge rate with Chinese money. The infrastructure is phenomenal. So growth's happening in those areas, and they're moving faster.
And they're building infrastructure with the latest technologies.
Yeah.
Whereas we're still managing legacy systems from power growth spurts from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dilemma of how do we stay apace with these growing economies that can actually fast track or have to fast track the latest and the greatest.
Yeah. And we'll just slide backwards over time. You look what's happening in the US at the moment. Is it in isolation? No, it's been a long period of competition. They've been fighting competition for so long, and they've just lost total focus of what their lifestyle is, what their service levels are, what they should be. Are they spending the right amounts? No, they're galloping around the world, like the UK did 3, 4, 500 years, and Spain and all the rest of it, building, and you know they lose focus, from what I can tell, and for whatever reason. But yeah, that's the US I think is on decline. Um, UK has been on decline for a while, and we'll follow them because good old Australia always looks after these people. But that's another discussion.
Yeah, that's beyond asset management.
Yeah, a little bit bigger. So yeah, so you can turn it around though, and that's the thing. You look at China. I mean, flying back from the UK, I was on the north side of Everest. We actually passed Everest, and I was on the north side, and we followed down into Hong Kong on the north side of the Himalayas, and the amount of infrastructure going down there, it was fair to say, 30, 40 years ago, it was paddy fields, rice fields. Now it's all infrastructure. It's phenomenal.
True, but they're going through their boom now.
Yeah.
So we can put our foresight forward and talk about what are their challenges in 20, 25 years when those assets are aging, and have they considered that? The evidence that we'd have would be probably not.
And it's not only that too. It's the fact that the populations are in decline. When I was in Japan, when I went to the conference, asset management conference, and Japan was very worried because the young generation around now don't want to have babies. They want a career. They want all these things, and so the focus isn't on growing a population. So Japan is worried. They projected that by the turn of the next century, their population, I think, is about 100 million at the moment, will drop down to 30 million. And you've got one magnificent city going from one end of Japan all the way down to Hiroshima and beyond. And that's all it is, one big massive city. That will be empty. So they're going to have a natural decline. And there'll be 70% of the infrastructure will be empty. There'll be gross demand they'll never use. But there's also opportunities there. That's another story too. But that's what's happening. And, we haven't, I believe, addressed demand like we should. Looking at all the factors, not just the demand on the infrastructure, but why the reason for that demand, and can we change the demand rather than have all this stuff aging and empty, not being used.
I think you've hit a good point here, and one of the things that I think will become more prevalent in planning for infrastructure is around uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it's not to say this isn't happening. There are cases in the world around uncertainty, right? And I'm going to take an instance of water resource planning in the UK. And, so there you've got that. Well, do you manage the demand or do you manage the supply, right? But if you manage the supply, you can build a dam, okay? You can get, yes, it's going to be expensive, but with the right engineering, the yield of that dam, and you can be pretty certain that if you build that dam, you're going to have that level of that supply, and you're going to get that security of supply. Yeah. The other thing you can do is, as you say, look at the demand, and the demand being, do we educate the customers in the efficient use of the water?
Yeah.
Now, the reality of any kind of customer-driven education is that, yes, you can look at the mean of what you're trying to achieve, but the uncertainty of whether you're going to get that return not only fluctuates in the short term, but also the longer term.
Yeah.
Because if you don't keep educating, then people go back to their current practices.
Yep.
And also education reduces with time. So in a purely cost-benefit analysis, you will end up with let's manage the demand. However, if you factor in the uncertainty of that demand, then you are going to start moving off the least cost solution because you want the certainty as well.
Yep.
Now, factor that into some of the big transitions that are going to happen, and I'm thinking the energy transition. Not only have you got the uncertainty of climate change, but you've also got the uncertainty of, if you're a supplier, what's going to happen in your market in terms of regulatory pressures. Is the cost of carbon going to go up, for example? And then you're actually doing in your planning, you're having to consider emerging technologies.
Yeah.
For example, hydrogen. Now, hydrogen, is still in its infancy. We're still in the debate about the economic level of hydrogen, let alone the scalability of hydrogen to meet there. And I think as we move through that conversation, we're going to have to take into account, not only the uncertainty of climate change, but the uncertainty, will that technology be there in a scalable way when we're hoping and what our plan says? Because people have made these big carbon reduction commitments. And I think that, to me, is the next big thing, is how do we factor in all this uncertainty? And there are techniques out there, for example, adaptive pathways, which basically say, well, we know we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but what should we do now to place ourselves in the best position? So in 5 years, we can then we're already on the journey, rather than coming in 5 years and going, oh dear, it's happened quicker than we expected, or it hasn't happened, and we no longer have. Our plan was hydrogen in 10 years. Well, technology doesn't support that.
Yeah. Enjoyed this video? Press the like button and subscribe. If you'd like to see more, please click on the Patreon link below and sign up.